Hey everybody, it's the Week in the Tackle podcast, the podcast where we get together on a sort of weekly basis and tackle the things in football or soccer that we thought were interesting. That intro is getting longer and longer every week. Too many qualifiers. I'm Tom Rennie, alongside me is MLS legend and top broadcaster Brian Dunny Dunseth. Hi Dunny, you all right?
I'm good. It's been a while. We had a little bit of a hiccup there. You had laryngitis. I had some family issues with my kids that we had to work through, but we're back together and things have changed dramatically.
They have changed dramatically. Last we were together, Gregg Berhalter was going to continue his glorious reign as US men's national team manager for many more years to come, and football was coming home again. That totally f***ed up, didn't it? Sorry, Tim. First things first. I mean, let's mention the Gareth Southgate thing first, the England thing first, because that's happened today as we record on Tuesday, July 16th. England lost on Sunday, perhaps not surprisingly. Didn't play amazingly well, hung in the game, but were beaten by, the best team in the tournament. In many ways, England did well to get to the final, considering how absolutely crap they were for the majority of every single game they were in. How excited, Dunny, are you about the fact that Gareth Southgate is coming to America to lead you to the World Cup in 26? Are you excited about that?
Oh, by the way, in the last 24 hours, I would also like to tell you that I heard Ralph Ragnick is going to be the new manager and head coach of the U.S. men's national team as well.
Solskjaer number 2. I love it.
Yeah, I cannot wait. This is going to be a blast. Listen, I think at the end of the day, we've got to find this unique balance of where we think we can be critical as fans and say, man, I would have not done what he did, or hey, I would have absolutely brought in substitutions way earlier. Hey, I wouldn't have relied on the guys that had so much sweat equity within the group based on previous tournaments. And yet at the same time, acknowledge that he made 3 finals and, and that he was able to, I think, bring together the general public and the footballers into kind of a unique status where there was a certain amount of respect that wasn't there previous. So not saying that, he deserves more than he deserves, not just saying that he deserves less than he deserves, but I think in there somewhere, you have to respect the way that he had handled himself and conducted himself as manager of England, because we all know that the pressure and the light is extremely hot when you have those type of players available for you each and every single time you decide to name your England national team. That being said, yeah, man, the fact that he's made another final, respect, man. And at the same time, man, you just wonder what could have been, because when you look at the players that were available off that bench, and when you think about this as a team that if they could get ahead of a game, they're probably not giving that game up. You need luck, you need fortune, you need a little bit of something in that gray area to make a really good run. But yeah, I mean, when you compare and contrast the performances, Spain throughout the tournament was the best team by far, hands down. And England had some really interesting moments where they had to gut through, find their results, and get to the final. But at the end of the day, I don't know. I feel like I can't be the only one that looks at that roster and thinks that maybe there could have been just a little bit more squeezed out of what was available to Gareth Southgate and his coaching staff.
Yeah, I mean, it's a weird one today being an England football fan, because, it's worth noting, I always say this to you, I was at the Iceland game when Roy Hodgson was in charge, and his bright idea was to make Harry Kane take the corners, which still fries my brain to this minute. And it was a real nadir. It was a terrible low moment in English football history off the back of 20-odd years of low moments from 1998 onwards. And England had previously had better players than the ones they have now even. I mean, you think about the team that lost to Portugal. We spoke about this a couple of weeks ago. The midfield was Paul Scholes, Frank Lampard, Steven Gerrard and David Beckham, with Wayne Rooney and Michael Owen up front and Sol Campbell and John Terry at centre-half. So, pretty good. And Rio Ferdinand's in that group and Jamie Carragher. It was incredible, right? And they couldn't win anything. They couldn't get past the quarterfinal. So England were not respected on the international stage. My favourite football film, is Mike Bassett, England Manager. Pele has an amazing cameo in that film. Where they say to Pele, who's going to win the World Cup? It's set at a World Cup in Brazil. And he's like, it could be Italy, could be Argentina, could be Colombia, could be Spain, yada, yada, yada. And they say, anyone else? And he's like, yeah, could maybe be Belgium. It could be France. And the guy's like, no, but what about England? And Pele's like, what are you talking about? Not a chance. And that rang true 15 years ago because we have been a bit of a joke internationally. And maybe we still are, I don't know. But I do think Gareth Southgate came in at a real low point and gave England fans like me who hadn't had anything to enjoy a terrific ride, right?
Mm.
So in the macro now he's gone, you can look back and say, amazing job. Compared to everyone that's come since Sir Ralph Ramsey, since 66 and all of that, he has been the best England manager in the last 58 years. The finals, the summers, the ability to go out with friends and watch the football, which is really what this is all about. You know, you go out with your Arsenal friends, your Tottenham friends, your Newcastle friends, whatever, and you're supporting the same team. It's a weird,
Mm.
funny, wonderful thing. And when you have more games and big games, it's great. So Gareth Southgate gave us that, and that's brilliant. The issue is that it felt like it was over before this tournament.
Mm.
And the weird thing about this, Danny, is that let's start with this conversation, then move to the rest of that in a minute. You know, no one is in charge for this long, right? Nobody anywhere at club level or international level really is in charge for this long, beyond maybe, you know, Didier Deschamps, who actually won the World Cup, so he gets a bit of a pass. But 8 years and 4 tournaments, no one gets that. And if you look at England across those 4 tournaments, the Croatia game where they lost the semi-final, they lost because Southgate was out-coached in the final, plus no one saw England being there anyway, and everyone was like, well, to be fair, Luka Modric can run a midfield at this point in his career better than anyone, so, you know, fair enough. The following tournament, yes, they should have beaten Italy in the final, but penalties and, you know, Roberto Mancini's obviously a better coach than Gareth Southgate, so, again, it was a great ride and we could have accepted it. The World Cup when they lost to France in maybe their best ever performance under Southgate, I think everyone thought, you know what, 6 years, 3 tournaments, probably time for handshakes and move on. He's obviously not getting better as a coach. The group is now changing from the other group. Maybe time to give someone else a whirl, and they didn't do it. And we get to this tournament, which always felt like his last tournament. It always
Mm.
felt like he was going to go, even though the FA wanted him to stay. And Danny, you're watching these games and you're just thinking, if another coach was in there, if there'd been some growth,
Yeah.
if there'd been some tactical development or acumen that wasn't there a few years ago, you might think, yeah, okay, he should stay on because he's clearly growing. But for another game, another final, another big game, and again, yes, it is great. You make a brilliant point. You're absolutely right. It's great to be in the big game. We didn't used to get in the big game.
Mm.
But to get in the big game and have the coach doesn't know what to do, we're set up badly sort of moments. I mean, to look at Spain with Nico Williams, Lamine Yamal, and Alvaro Morata, you know, old journeyman centre forward, and he drops deep playing in 2 wingers. And then look at Harry Kane, who does Morata but better, but
Mm.
not give him 2 wingers for longer than 4 minutes in the entire tournament. I
Yeah.
mean, that's the coach's fault, right? Gareth Southgate just showed he'd run out of ideas, he'd run out of rope, and if he'd have left before this tournament, I don't know, maybe England could have won it.
Yeah, you're in quite the predicament now because who comes next, right? And we do the theoretical, who would have done something different? Well, I think a lot of managers probably would have done something different because they would have had a different set of eyes on it, and they would have had a different set. This kind of goes back to the theory, and I know we'll probably touch on Berhalter, but the idea of resetting after a World Cup cycle,
Hmm.
because the reality is that when you bring in a new manager, you might lose 1 or 2 players that are a part of that stranglehold of positions, but you also might open up opportunities for players in the roster that hadn't been there, that hadn't previously been seen as valuable from the current coaching staff and the manager. Um, and I think what's going to be interesting to see is you've got a great group of young players in this England squad, and so you got to find this kind of unique balance of, yes, they're developed with their domestic football, and their domestic football performances then dictates if they're called up to England to play for England. But at the same time, you have to have an identity. You have to have a philosophy or an approach or a theoretical idea of, okay, this is the way I want this group to play, and I'm going to choose my players based on this system. Or I'm going to deviate whatever my system is based on the players that I have available. And there's a unique balance in there. So yeah, listen, I think at the end of the day, you and I were one of many that were watching the games and saying, okay, I understand what you're trying to do. Um, is this giving you the best resources, both with player personnel and tactical setup, to then beat whatever the opponent is for England on the day? And understanding the construct between the group stage and the knockout rounds are very different. But the idea of like, well, we get out of the group and then, you know, it's knockouts. I don't know. I respect it, but at the same time, there's something about momentum, and momentum is
Mm,
a funny old dog in the conversation, because self momentum and finding the right pieces, and understanding that throughout the course of the tournament, players are going to play themselves out of the starting 11, and players are going to play themselves into the starting 11. But then you get to those moments where even the broadcasters, whether abroad or here in the States, you listen to like England's got to get a hold of this game. England needs to get a hold. Like, oh, you can feel like England's under the cosh. England's under pressure, and you're like, well, man, I'm looking at this roster of players and thinking to myself, well, I know who I'd want to see on right now as a fan. I know who I would think about bringing on. I understand who I would think about bringing off. I understand that maybe my two wingers that are external and yet internal wingers, maybe better suited for some fresh legs and maybe more dynamism with some guys that are out and out wingers with variation of service, and maybe that alleviates some of the pressure of outside backs, and maybe that
mm,
alleviates some of the pressure for Declan and Kobe in the mid. So, anyways, long story short, utmost respect for Gareth Southgate and what he's
definitely.
done throughout his tenure. Intriguing notion for now the England FA to identify who they think is the right person, and does it have to be an Englishman?
Mm. I mean, on that, I think it does. I mean, I know I said this to you before, but
Yeah.
international football for me as concept is passport v passport, right? That's what it is. It is essentially conceptually xenophobic, and that's what international football is, right? And it's. I know there are amazing Argentinian coaches working all over South and Central America, and I know there have been managers of other nations that have done a great job with other nations. You know, Portuguese managers in charge of Brazil, vice versa. I get all that, but for me, that shouldn't be allowed. I don't think it's best person for the job, because if it was best person for the job, I would have got Erling Haaland to be our striker. Right? That's what I would have done. I got Lionel Messi to be our number 10. That's not the point of the whole thing. Plus, I do think as a major soccer nation, I've said soccer pointedly there, but I should say football, I suppose. As a major football nation, England should respect its own coaches more. No Englishman has ever won the Premier League. Howard Wilkinson was the last Englishman to win the English top flight. English coaches are not respected mainly by English people. And so I do think that our success of an English coach will be good for those that come through. And we do have good coaches. They just don't get opportunities to maybe compete at the very top level. And that sort of leads me to who it's going to be. I know you always kind of bring that up when we talk about who the next manager is going to be. And I actually really think I've taken a bit of heat from a couple of WhatsApp groups on this morning, because, everyone's all neg about who the next person should be.
Oh, you better not say who I think you're going to say.
Who am I going to say?
Are you going to say David Moyes?
I am going to say David. No, I think what's England's problem been, right? England's problem under Gareth Southgate has been not good enough on the ball. That has been the big problem. Defensively, very good. Organisationally, very good. Before this tournament, great at set pieces and all of that. And if you're in the top 10 in the world, you only really have, in a 2-year cycle, 4 really tough games. The rest of them are 8-0 wins against San Marino. What I want to see is the next time England get in a big game, and maybe they will be in the World Cup quarterfinal in 2 years' time, they can control the ball against a good team, a great team, a potential winner. And that has been the issue. And, to your point from earlier on, Declan Rice, Kobbie Mainoo, and maybe if you can't get hold of midfield, Adam Wharton or Jude Bellingham dropping deeper,
Yeah.
they can win a midfield battle, even against people as good as Fabian and Rodri and everyone else they play, like Yathab or whatever. They can, but they just didn't, whether it was coaching, whether it was whatever. Graham Potter can do that. And I know that Graham Potter is maybe not a sexy choice. It's also frustrating that if you put him and Gareth Southgate next to each other, they could do that Marx Brothers thing because they look so similar. But I actually think that he brings attributes to England that they don't have. He is really good at coaching a team to have the ball. Was very good dealing with individual players, building them up and building a strong mentality within the camp at his pre-Chelsea jobs. Has been waiting for the right opportunity. And I think he brings a profile to the England players that they don't currently have. And I do think in the next tournament, if he has been the coach for 2 years, in a game against Spain, they won't be looking to knock it back to Jordan Pickford to punt it as long as possible. He'd be coaching them across a 2-year period to be like, no, let's pass the ball. right?
Mm.
That bit, really briefly, that bit in the final where England have just scored, and you, I'm sure, have seen the video. Kyle Walker has a throw by the offensive right corner flag. There's 5 in the box, 2 on the edge of the box, and he throws it 70 yards back to Stones, who squares it to Pickford, who blasts it long, and they give the ball away, and England lose all their momentum. That would not happen under Graham Potter. They might not make the final,
Mm.
absolutely, but they wouldn't do that. And Danny, for me, that's been their problem.
Yeah, it's interesting theory. I can buy what you're selling with regards to the identity and how he wants to play his football. Again, it's going to be very fascinating to see who follows Gareth Southgate. Because you mentioned something, and I found this unique thread in what you were saying, that really fits U.S. soccer as well. Is do we overlook the success of our managers here in the United States because the idea of bigger, brighter, and better? Yeah, we're in a unique situation because now with the rise of social media and the power of, I would guess, suggestion to an extent, that you really hope that the smartest people in the room are analytically, theoretically, and I guess at the end of the day, applying best practices to
Mm.
figure out who they think would fit what this group actually needs. And I think that speaks for both of our countries right now.
Absolutely. And I think that anyone who is making any decision because of what is being said on social media, you might be an idiot and shouldn't have your job. You've really got to ignore that and try and be a professional. And I really hope it isn't, Twitter, whatever it's called now, thinks that Mourinho should be the manager. Let's do it. I just
No,
can't see that being real.
no.
A final thought on the European Championship before we get to a bit of US chat. Dunny, Spain have won it, winning every single game. No doubt they were the best team in it and deserved to win the final. But in the macro of it all, a lot of people today, and I kind of am in this group, would say that there was a couple of exciting games in the group stages. Beyond that, I'm not sure this European Championship will live long in my memory.
Hmm.
What about you?
Yeah, I mean, I think when you kind of go back, it kind of falls in line, right, with major tournaments that at the end of the day, you see some grinding moments. There's some really fun. I mean, I think for me, talking about what Romania did was pretty incredible. What Georgia did was pretty incredible. Slovakia and Slovenia kind of coming through. Those were surprises. Turkey, what they were, Arda Güler and company, what they were capable of doing was the complete opposite of what we expected them to do last tournament, which they failed miserably and lost all 3 games. Um, but yeah, what's interesting for me is I guess I come from a little bit of a different perspective, right? Because I would be watching the Euros in the afternoon, and then I'm watching Copa America in the evenings. So you have kind of this completely, wildly, oddly different circumstances of games
Mm.
where the fields are ideal, the weather's ideal, the ball's kind of skipping around, and you have more of this kind of European style where then you watch Copa America and sometimes they're on these strips of grass that aren't laid correctly and there's sand flying everywhere and the referees and the combativeness. And I almost felt like, the United States would have succeeded at the Euros as opposed to failing
Mm.
at Copa America because the style is different. Because they got CONCACAF in the most obvious form of getting CONCACAF. They got CONCACAF and found themselves on the outside looking in. So yeah, I think at the end of the day, the storylines are the storylines. England, France, Spain, what
Was
this
it too
all
big,
kind.
Danny? Was it too big, the Euros? The World Cup's being expanded. The Euros have been
I
expanded. A last 16 in the
I
Euros?
I liked
80% of
it.
Europe playing?
Yeah, I liked it. I can be honest with you, I did like it, but it was painful for us as broadcasters to try to go on air on Sirius and have to walk through 3 games the day before, walk through 2 games at night, and then prep for another 5 games the next day.
Yeah.
It was hellacious. It was crazy. It was wild.
I'm sure
Um,
people listening to this driving a cab or doing a particularly hard job, a real job, are their hearts are bleeding for us right now,
yeah,
having
yeah, yeah,
had to
yeah,
do that.
yeah. No, I know.
Yeah.
When it's all said and
We had
done.
to watch 5 games some days. I had to watch England, then Spain, then
Yeah,
Argentina.
yeah.
It's
Well, I mean,
like being down a coal mine.
the reality is that we cheated our way through the early group stages because there's no
Yes.
way we were watching all these games. We're like, you got to get on with your day. There's you got to do. Sorry, Tim, I haven't cursed yet. So yeah, I think
Who's your favourite Georgia player?
I like the idea, but all I kept thinking of was how crazy it was going to be. Um, not just the fan perspective, but when it's in the United States, how the heat and the humidity and the travel is going to affect these players. Because I think when you watch the Euros and kind of the small subset of travel that these group stages look like, it's going to be drastically different. And
Yeah.
I've got a tough time believing that the winner of the World Cup, based on what I just saw, is coming out of Europe.
Yeah. Listen, let's talk about the US. I want to get to Copa America, but we weren't together last week, so I do want to get your views for our listeners here on Berhalter leaving as US men's national team manager. It was a disastrous Copa America in many ways, despite the fact, as we've previously discussed, there were mitigating circumstances to the way they went out at the group stage. Are you surprised it came around as quickly as it did, considering, I forget the terminology now, there's the middle management strategic review going on, which we thought would take months and months and months. Maybe it will to inevitably appoint Gareth Southgate. But what do you make to the fact he's gone? Right decision?
Yeah, I think right decision in terms of we were sold that Copa America was going to be the runway, was going to be the path, was going to be, the idea of what the World Cup was supposed to look like. There were expectations, and the reality of Nations League in UEFA and World Cup qualifying around the world being such a disastrous situation for the United States that, in the fall, getting to play Germany and Ghana was going to be one-offs. Getting to play Colombia and Brazil before the tournament started were going to be invaluable. And understanding that, with the God-given right of expectations of hosting the Copa America and hosting the World Cup, that the United States at a bare minimum should get into the knockout rounds and then see where the cards fall, whether you face Brazil or Colombia. And the reality is, in a moment, and you hate to put that type of pressure on Tim Weah, but if the red card doesn't happen,
Yeah.
the United States are through against Panama. They're probably either drawing or losing against Uruguay. And then you go into the knockout stage where you're looking for revenge against Colombia, or you're looking for the replay off the 1-1 draw against Brazil. I've said this, Gregg Berhalter is neither a better or a worse coach based on what happened at this tournament. What this allows you to do is immediately sever all ties if there's a hint of anything behind the scenes that Matt Crocker, and this is a Matt Crocker decision, formerly of Wales, of England, of Southampton. If Matt Crocker, and by the way, his 1A decision after being named sporting director, general manager, whatever we're calling it here in the United States for US soccer, this was his decision. So ultimately, it's his failure. So if anything in terms of rectifying whatever he's seeing behind the scenes as not ideal since putting Gregg Berhalter back in charge of the U.S. men's national team after what transpired post Qatar, well, then now's the time to make that change. But the issue now is when you've made this decision and you've effectively said that money is no issue going forward with regards to salary, that immediately places an unbelievable burden on your shoulders. And that is, you got to go get Jurgen Klopp. You got to go get Pep Guardiola. You got to go get one of these massive, massive managers. And I certainly don't think that's the case. And for fans, there's a unique balance that we got to work through: the international manager versus the domestic manager. At the end of the day, this U.S. men's national team job, I think, is a huge job. I think it's appetizing in terms of being able to host, not having to go through World Cup qualifying, being the host country, being the host manager of this U.S. group that is arguably, from a generation standpoint, for what they're doing in Europe right now for their domestic football, we haven't seen with these type of numbers. But the reality is they failed, and failure has circumstances and costs. And the costs, unfortunately for Gregg Berhalter, was he and his staff. Now, I think Gregg's going to get a great job, whether that's abroad or domestic. I think he'll be successful in his next steps, but I think right now this is going to be a really fascinating test for Matt Crocker, and whatever the system, this systematic approach, this data-driven approach, these certain situational tests that he's putting these prospective managers through. If you're going to say a Jurgen Klopp, you're going to say a Hervé Renard, you're going to say a Steve Cherundolo, or you're going to say a Wilfried Nancy, or a Ralph Ragnick, or whoever else, a Gareth Southgate, whatever that looks like. At the end of the day, I think you've got to find somebody whose tactics are progressive. I think you have to have someone who, the moment they walk in that room, demands respect from the players. Everyone sits up a little bit straighter. Everyone knows that they're on their toes during training sessions. And everybody, I think, understands that it's vital for them to be playing week in, week out.
Mm.
Because having players that can walk back into the side immediately based on injury or form or lack thereof, and have a guaranteed starting spot. Because the reality is that there's really no positions that were under question underneath Gregg Berhalter. It was Matt Turner, Anthony Robinson, Tim Ream, Chris Richards, Serginho Dest, or Joe Scally. It was Tyler Adams. It's going to be Weston. It was going to be Gio. It was going to be Christian. It's going to be Tim Way, and it's going to be Flo Balogun. And
Mm.
that was going to be the starting 11 no matter what. So with a new set of eyes, with a new set of respect, it's a massive, massive decision. And I don't think there's a certain candidate that is better than the other ones, at least with regards to the names that have been kind of thrown out there so far. But I do believe there's a tremendous amount of disrespect that's being thrown to any of the MLS managers that's been linked with the vacancy for the US
Mm.
head coaching job.
Are you excited about the fact you've got to learn the lyrics to the Atomic Kitten song when Southgate gets the job? Southgate, you're the one.
Uh,
You still turn me on. Welcome to America. That's how it'll go. You can
yeah.
have that.
It was I don't know if this was a joke or if I was being semi-serious, but I was almost typing up my resignation letter for not only this podcast, but for Sirius, if God forbid England had won the Euros, because you lot would have been miserable to deal with
I
forever.
I'm sorry. I've got to say that not only are Americans in general unbearable about all your sports when you call yourselves world champions because no one else
Yeah,
plays it, but also
true.
every nation is unbearable when they win these things. Have you seen some of these Spain celebrations? Rodri, who lives in fucking Manchester, sorry Tim, he's literally saying Gibraltar is Spanish.
Mm.
I have got no time to get into the debated ownership of the small principality at the bottom of the Iberian Peninsula right now. But guess what? It's controversial and it's not.
Where's Danny Higginbottom when we need him?
Where's Chief Rocker? Hey, where's the Chief Rocker when we need him? So I don't know. Everyone when they win's pretty unbearable, and England haven't won anything in 58 years. I saw some stat the other day that there's only 3 nations that have gone longer without winning any trophy in all of world football. It's like South Korea, Iran, and someone else, then England. So anyway, there you go. Wanted to ask you about Copa America. 2 quick questions, 4
Yeah.
out of time. Firstly, on Argentina having won the competition. And I was reading a piece this morning about comparing them to the great Spain team that went European Championship, World Cup winners, European Championship. Argentina have essentially done the equivalent Copa
Mhm.
America, World Cup, Copa America. And the piece was arguing that they have a similar kind of stature. And it was interesting. I mean, I don't know, I don't have a firm opinion on it, but I would sort of say that I don't feel excited by this Argentinian team,
Hmm.
nor do I think they're going to have the same cultural impact as that Spanish team of 12, 16 years ago, whatever it
Yeah.
was. And I just sort of watch them and I think, yeah, I mean, I get it. The story and the narrative's great. They went from perennial disappointments to they found a way to work together and get some incredible splurts out of the end of Messi's career and all that sort of stuff. But also, well, they just seem like a really good, effective team as opposed to a cultural phenomenon. What say you?
Yeah, I think this is it's interesting that you say that, because I look at it differently. And maybe that's a byproduct of being here in the States and not being over in Europe.
Hmm.
Because and growing up with Lucas and Andres Cortolo, who is my Argentina hermanos, been around Argentina national team since high school with these guys. What I would say is that when you watch this team step on the field, while it is all about Messi, the collective group has grown into such fantastic players, and they can knock a game down to bare bones and knuckles, and at the same time they can speed it up to world-class performances. I said before the tournament they're my favorites. I said Uruguay and Colombia are the only 2 teams that can take them down. And at the end of the day, yeah, there's controversial moments. Yeah, there's less than ideal. The ankle of Messi when it's just completely blown up.
Mm.
When you thought the contact was in his other knee on the tackle when he went to ground. Um, I was fortunate enough to do the friendly against Ecuador before the start of the tournament, and Messi didn't play. He came in for like the final 15 minutes, probably the least effective I've seen him for the national team in that particular match, and they were phenomenal. Rodrigo De Paul and McAllister and Enzo in that midfield, Di Maria, with the way Lautaro Martinez is running around. It's a fun team to watch,
Mm.
and a team that I think when they play, and this is kind of the unique balance, right? Because I think if you took any of the European teams and you put them down in CONMEBOL, man, CONMEBOL, there's a reason why none of these players are afraid of anything. Because if they go play in Barranquilla, or they go to Rio, or they go to Buenos Aires, or they go to La Paz, or they go to, insert name here,
Yeah.
Quito, they are so battle tested. So the game looks different, the game feels different. But I can understand your sentiment. I would love to see if there's a way that a friendly can be played for the winner of Euros versus the winner of Copa America to have kind
Well,
of what,
they
yeah,
are
have
playing,
that
Danny. It's
triumpho or whatever
it's
it's
next
called.
year's Finalissima.
There you go.
Next year,
Yeah,
which I think was won by Argentina
yeah.
3 years ago.
It was in London, right? They
It
they
was at
won in
Wembley,
London.
yeah. It was
Yeah,
at Wembley,
yeah.
yeah. I
Uh,
wondered why there was a bunch of Argentinian and Italian people in London that weekend. I didn't realize it was on. And
yeah.
then, yeah, it was wild. Listen, we're nearly out of time, but I did want to ask you briefly. We won't have time for the entirety of the conversation. I'm sure we'll have it on Sirius XMFC at some point. But the final, the handling of the fans getting in and the issues that Hard Rock
Horrible.
Stadium had. I
Yeah,
mean, look, there are people that have been sort of passing out and people getting in without tickets. There's fans or individuals that have got in without tickets. They've kind of rushed the gates, but also
yeah,
the organisers have come in for criticism as well. We're still in the midst of finding out what happened, but it's worth noting that this is not the first time a major
yeah,
event. You look at the Champions League final and the last European Championship final at Wembley Stadium.
yeah.
Um, Something's got to change, hasn't it? I mean, something's gone
Yeah.
drastically wrong for something like this to happen. Horrible
Yeah,
stuff.
listen, it's not a good look for the United States hosting the World Cup in 2 years, especially because that specific venue is going to host multiple games. This is a CONMEBOL event, so the organizers and who they put in charge have obviously failed. We saw the situation between the families of the Uruguayan players in kind of the public seating in the lower bowl with the Colombian fans and Darwin Nunez jumping the fence and trying to protect his family.
Mm.
And then ultimately the scenes. And listen, my wife and kids were down in Orlando for the US Brazil game. It was the same temperature, 100 degrees, hot as hell. And God forbid they would have been caught in kind of that crush of fans being stuck outside,
Mm.
for an hour or so. Um, yeah, listen, it's they got to figure this out. And the way it's going to be handled now, unfortunately, is going to be he said, she said. It's going to be a lot of finger pointing. It's going to be a lot of skirting of responsibility. The Colombian president and his son was arrested for assault afterwards, after the game, on some of the security officers. That's trying to get down to the field or whatever that looked like. It's just horrible scenes all the way around, and hopefully, this failed kind of acid test is you get this put together and run. So FIFA is going to probably have to look at this really diligently and understand now what the complexities are going to look like throughout the course of the World
Yeah.
Cup with these type of fans. It's going to be just as hot. It's going to be in the same venues. The field hopefully is going to be much better. They're going to probably lay fields down and leave them there for a good
Terrible,
month,
isn't it?
month and a
It's
half.
terrible.
Yeah, not ideal. So, but this is the money grab. This is what they want. They want the credit cards. They want the butts and seats, and that means they got to find the biggest possible stadiums. And usually, the biggest possible
Yeah.
stadiums are going to have these artificial surfaces on them.
Not a good look, and something both Jesse Marsh and Marcelo Bielsa have been pretty outspoken about in the last week. But we've got no further time to talk about that on today's program because we are out of time. Next week, we're going to be live together for a couple of days in Tim Horsey's bedroom in our hotel in Columbus, Ohio, as we cover MLS All-Star for Sirius XMFC on Tuesday and Wednesday. We're also going to be somewhere in Ohio on Monday. We'll let people know when they can come and buy us as many drinks as possible. I suppose we'll have to buy you one too. I don't know,
Yeah,
but we'll see you.
have them send us where we need to go. Where do we
Yes.
what's the bar? Where do we need to hang out?
Send us your suggestions. My Twitter's still on. Thomas J. Rennie. You can find Danny at his burner account. Sexy boy number one. Just find that on social media. That'll be him. But we'll let you know what we're going to do somewhere or other. And we're going to be sort of together doing some, including maybe on Monday, hopefully a batting cage somewhere in Ohio, which will be scary, I think, for me
Can't
at least.
wait.
Right, that's been Week in the Tackle. Brian Dunster, thank you very much indeed. I've been Tom Rennie. Tim Horsey produced the programme, and we'll be back next week. See you then.